Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Bell. Come on in. We do have a few folks with us here in person, but welcome to everyone who is joining us online. We appreciate you being with us today. My name is Beth Bell. I am the marketing director here at the Dali Museum. We are excited to have you for this session of our Coffee with the Curator series. And today we are joined by Megan Moyer, who will do a talk focusing on the women who inspired Impressionist painters. Before we get to the talk, please join me in thanking the City of St. Petersburg for their continued sponsorship. And a special thanks to all of our members who help make programs like this happen. And a special thanks to our sponsors of the current exhibition, Dali and the Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, Degas, and more. Our presenting sponsor is Kane's Furniture. Our supporting sponsors are Kay and Joel Bronstein, Betsy Schweitzer, Sandy Tarosky and David Zern, and Adele Visaggio. Our airport partner is St. Pete Clearwater International Airport, PIE, and our hotel partner is the Vinoy Resort and Golf Club. Please visit our website when you get a chance, thedali.org, for information about online activities and programming, including these upcoming events. We are holding art and meditation on March 13th. We have poetry on March 14th. We have yoga, story time, and dilly-dally on Sunday, March 17th. We have an Impressionism plate painting workshop planned for March 26th. And we have a great member event for all of our members, an afternoon tea at the Dali, where we'll explore the Impressionism exhibit, and that's on March 27th. Also, please join us for our next Coffee with the Curator in April, on April 3rd, titled The Audacity of Impressionism. And now it's my pleasure to welcome the Megan Moyer. Megan Moyer serves as our membership manager here at the Dali. She's been here 6 years in a variety of roles, managing in the museum's education, events, and visitor experience departments, and of course now on the marketing team. She is a 6th-generation Floridian and attended Florida State University, majoring in English creative writing and religious studies. Megan has devoted her professional career to education, previously working at the Glaser Children's Museum before she came here to the Dali. In addition to her service and membership, Megan is a docent, a liaison for our Zodiac Membership Committee, and oversees the museum's Hotel and Hospitality Partnership Program. Please join me both virtually and here in person with a few folks in welcoming Megan Moyer.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Beth. And I'd like to begin this morning by also thanking Dr. Kim McQuarrie and Joy Garrett-Douglas for the privilege of speaking in this prestigious series, our Coffee with the Curator, to my family who's watching from afar, and also to our members here at the Dali Museum who make lectures and programming like this possible. My members, thank you so much. So today's lecture this morning is going to be covering More Than Muses, the women who inspired the Impressionists. And what better place to begin than to discuss what is a muse? So the definition of the word muse as a verb is to become absorbed in thought. Think about being amused or finding something musing in that context. This morning, I'm giving a lecture at the Dali Museum. In Greek, the word for museum means a shrine to the muses or a place to become inspired. And that is what we're going to do today. In context to this discussion, we're going to be talking about the definition of a muse as a noun. So a person or personified force who is the source of inspiration for a creative artist. The women featured in this presentation proved to be more than a source of inspiration, however. They were comrades. They were lovers and wives, and they also held very complicated relationships with the artists themselves. Their contribution and sacrifice for the Impressionism period of art inspires artists even to this day. So we'll begin with comrades. And there may not be a better example of this than Victorine Morant. Victorine Morant was born on February 18th of 1844. She was raised in a family of artisans. Her mother was a milliner or a hat maker, and her father was a patinator of bronzes. Victorine was discovered by Monet by playing the guitar on the street when she was just a teenager. There is no evidence that she was ever married, and she was also an artist herself, attending art school at the Académie Julienne after she modeled for Monet. This is believed to be one of the first depictions of Victorine Morant, painted by Monet in 1862. She was just 18 years old at the time that this was painted. After the portrait of Victorine Morant, this piece was painted just a few months afterwards. This painting was inspired by a meeting between Monet and a local street singer. And a fun story is that the street singer actually mocked Monet for asking her to pose for the painting and laughed in his face. So when the singer refused to pose for the painting, Monet asked for his new favorite model to pose instead. And this is the famed painting, The Street Singer by Monet in 1862. The third piece, painted in the same year as the portrait and the street singer, differs from the others. Monet has depicted Victorine as a more masculine matador with more rounded and accentuated or even chubbier features. A stark difference from the previous depictions of a more feminine French debutante. This series in 1862 shows the gradual progression of Victorine's portrayal and Monet's work. And you'll see in the next painting we're going to discuss that transition continues boldly. The following year, as many of you have probably recognized this piece, Olympia by Monet in 1863, the following year the progression continues. This painting features Victorine and a woman named Laure, who posed as a servant. Laure also appears in an earlier Monet painting, Children in the Tuileries Garden, painted in 1861 to 62, and she is dressed in the same ensemble, so she should be easily recognizable. Remember, this is during a Victorian era, and while this does take place in France, we have to remember kind of what this time frame was like, especially in the 1860s. Women were wearing full clothing, bustles, covering ankles. This was a more prudish time. So this painting was shocking, to say the least. Victorine was well known in Paris societal circles. So a woman of her stature to be posing this way caused an uproar. The confrontational gaze that you can see of the subject, as well as the details, if you note the orchid behind her ear, the jewelry on her wrist, the ribbon tied around her neck, as well as the shawl and the presentation of flowers. And it's kind of a little dark, but if you note the black cat all the way over on the right-hand side in the upright position, these were all symbols of wealth and sensuality. And the name Olympia, being associated with prostitutes in the 1860s Paris, caused controversy when it was first exhibited in 1865 in the Paris Salon. So for a woman of her stature to pose technically as a prostitute was not well favored by the masses. In the same year, originally titled Le Bain, Déjeuner sur l'herbe, or Luncheon in the Grass, was painted by Manet in 1863. This was originally rejected by the Paris Salon jury, and it was not well received. Manet chose to exhibit that year this piece, plus two others, at the Salon des Refusés, sparking controversy for his pulling from the salon. This exhibition gave Manet further fame, but this piece neglected to sell at its debut. Now, while Victorine was Manet's celebrated muse, she also posed for Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Alfred Stevens. Most of the Impressionist painters admired her red hair, as that translated beautifully in Impressionist works, and desired to work with her. This piece, The Parisian Sphinx by Alfred Stevens, was painted in 1870. But Victorine Morant was also an artist and painted this self-portrait in 1876. She attended art school at the Académie Julienne, and during her studies, she and Manet began to form an estrangement due to their conflicting views on style, as Morant preferred a more classical style of painting. Even though they were estranged in their viewpoints, they were still comrades and confidants even through the remaining years of their life. This last painting that Manet features Victorine is titled The Railway in 1873. So that is the railway is the last piece that Manet actually painted, where Morant was actually the model. And this painting that Victorine painted herself, self-portrait, in 1876 was just 3 years after. This painting was exhibited in 1876 at the Paris Salon when Manet's work was actually rejected. So if you think about how he's kind of been formulating that through the years, this is not the first time, obviously, that he had been rejected. So this is a steady theme for Manet, who refuses to conform to the standards presented by the salon itself. But she was able to show in that show, even though he was rejected. She also exhibited at the Académie des Beaux-Arts as well. These are two other paintings by Victorine Morant. Unfortunately, most of her artwork has been lost, not for any particular reason that is known, but there are a few examples left of her artwork to this day. The one to the left, Le Briquet, or Boy Eating a Loaf of Bread, the date of when this was painted was unknown. And then on the right-hand side, you have Le Jour de Rameau, also known as Palm Sunday, that was painted in 1880. Both paintings are in the collection of the Musée de l'Art de l'Histoire in Cologne, where she spent her remaining years until her death at the ripe old age of 83. And now on to two ladies who were even closer to the Impressionists and the lovers and wives section of this lecture today. The first is Camille Dancieux, who would become Camille Monet, Monet's first wife. Camille first met Monet in her teens, where she began working as a model. She met Monet 7 years her senior and began modeling for him early in his career, and they lived in utter poverty at this time. His family disapproved of the match extensively between them, especially after the pregnancy announcement of their first child, Jean. The first of their two children, Michel, would be born in 1877. They married on June the 28th of 1870. Camille was 23. And just as a fun note for other art enthusiasts, Gustave Courbet was actually the witness at their wedding. I'm sure that was an absolute riot. Monet's second wife was not fond of Monet's admiration of his first wife, Camille, and had most of her photographs and her belongings destroyed. This is one of the few, if not only, known photographs of Camille still existing to this day. So this is Luncheon on the Grass, not Manet, Claude Monet, 1865 to 66, same title as the earlier piece by Manet, so no confusion. This was to be a tribute and a challenge to Manet's rejection from the Salon at this time for his original. This is the first painting where Camille appears in Monet's works. And this is the beginning of over 50 paintings where she will be featured. Gustave Courbet and Frédéric Bazille are also featured in this painting. Courbet is the seated figure on the picnic blanket in the gray suit. And Bazille and Camille are the two figures to the far left in the top hat and in the white dress to the left of the lady in yellow. This famous piece, The Woman in a Green Dress, painted by Claude Monet in 1866, was painted when Camille was just 19 years old. Again, they lived in poverty, so this is going to be the start of the escalation of Monet being known as an artist. Monet at the time was trying to make a name for himself and submitted this work to the Paris Salon in 1866, where it was well received by critics. This piece here, Camille at the Beach at Trouville, was painted by Claude Monet in 1870. Again, Monet's family was not a big fan of Camille, but his admiration stands true. This painting was actually painted on their honeymoon. Now, Camille also modeled for Renoir. Portrait of Camille Monet by Pierre-Auguste Renoir was painted in 1872 to 74, and also by Manet. The Monet family in their garden at Argenteuil, Edouard Manet, 1874. This painting features Monet in the background, gardening. That is Camille seated, and their firstborn child, Jean, is on her lap. In this painting, Woman with a Parasol, Madame Monet and her son, this painting is one of Monet's most recognizable and revered works of Impressionism. This is one of 18 works that were exhibited at the Second Impressionist exhibition in April of 1876, inspiring John Singer Sargent, who saw the piece in person to create a similar painting titled Two Girls with Parasols at Fladbury. Now, one of the most beautiful and haunting portraits of Camille is sadly going to be her last. After the birth of their second child, Michel, Camille's health rapidly declines, and Monet spent most of their money on her care. And Camille died, regrettably, at the age of 32. And there is a letter that Monet wrote to a friend that discusses the reason why he painted this piece of her just before she passed. Upon looking at the body of his wife, Camille, watching her tragic forehead, almost mechanically observing the colors which death imposing on her rigid face, blue, yellows, gray, what do I know? How natural to want to reproduce the last image of her who was leaving us forever. But even before the idea came to me to record her beloved features, something in me automatically responded to the shock of colors. Oh, forgive me. Monet is not the only Impressionist to be inspired by his lover and wife. Renoir shared the same admiration for his wife. This is Aline Charigot, born May 23rd, 1859. Aline was born into a farming family and received very little education. She worked as a seamstress with her mother in Montmartre, Paris, before meeting Renoir in 1880. He was 38 and she was 22. Aline was a model for Renoir and later became his wife in 1890 and had 3 children together, Pierre, Jean, and Claude. Renoir enjoyed the simplistic nature of his wife, as he was not impressed by pompous women. She had a love for the arts and decorated her bedroom with paintings by Johann Jankind. She was dedicated to her children and her disabled husband, whose arthritis became severe as Renoir were to age. In this early and famous piece depicting Aline, she is the seated figure in the bottom left-hand corner with the dog in her lap. An Affenpinscher for you dog enthusiasts. That is the breed of dog. Aline actually replaced a different model in the piece. So the woman who originally sat in that seat in the original painting annoyed Renoir so much that he humored her until the end, and then after she left, he asked Aline to model instead and painted her over the original model. He absolutely refused to allow that woman to stay in it. And so that starts the beginning of Aline being a model and muse for Renoir before they were married. This is another famed painting featuring Aline. This is the Blonde Bather, painted in 1882. This piece is an ode to Renoir's inspiration by Italian frescoes. Renoir's friends noted the distinct change of style, the soft contours, and that apart from the wedding ring, if you can see it on her left-hand finger, there are no signs of modernity in this painting whatsoever. This depiction gave rise for others, though, to refer to Aline as rotund in appearance. And she carries that through the remainder of her life. She was definitely a voluptuous woman. As can also be seen in the Large Bathers by Renoir in 1884 to 87, Aline is featured as the central figure in the middle. The Impressionists definitely had a thing for redheads, as just like Victorine Morant, as you see in Aline, the bright color definitely gives way to the painting, and she is featured there in the mid section. This famous portrait of his wife, Aline Charigot, by Renoir in 1885. Although Renoir loved his wife deeply, he was a notorious womanizer, not unlike any other artist or impressionist, to be fair, but he was known to have a lot of lady friends and having a multitude of affairs. After 25 years together, Aline had just about had enough and separated from Renoir just before her passing in 1915. Renoir's favorite portrait of his wife is this one, and he kept this portrait, refusing to sell it until his death in 1919, 4 years after Aline's passing. Now for the more complicated relationships. As I stated earlier, a lot of the muses and models for the Impressionist artists, they were contributions. And so some of those contributions also could be viewed as sacrifices. And so we are going to kind of delve a little bit into that with some additional points of discussion. We have Marie van Godem, who was born June 7th, 1865. Her death is unknown. There are no photographs of Marie, but this is a painting by Degas of her. Marie was a Paris opera ballet dancer, originally from Belgium. Her father died early in her life, leaving her mother to care for her and her two sisters. When they first moved to Paris, they settled in a district known as one of the poorest and most squalid areas for prostitution. After changing their place of residence, they relocated near Montmartre, just a few blocks from Degas' studio. And to earn extra money, Marie modeled for Degas since 1878 for both paintings and sketches. You may recognize her more in this work. Little Dancer of 14 Years was sculpted by Edgar Degas from 1879 to 1881. In 1881, Degas had finished this piece, a wax sculpture dressed in a real tutu, bodice, and slippers, and was presented at the 6th Impressionist exhibition in Paris. There are even painters' brushes and balled wire that are literally holding the interior of this structure together. However, the reviews were negative, to say the least, calling the sculpture hideous and depraved. This piece was considered disturbingly lifelike and beyond the marble structures, or sculptures, that the public was accustomed to. Degas never exhibited another sculpture again. The unfavorable reaction to the sculpture also spelled the end, sadly, of Marie's career. She was reported in a Parisian journal to be frequently seen at 2 taverns with reputations as being brothels. And after her dismissal from the Paris Opera Ballet in 1882, Marie seemed to fade away with no documentation of her later life or her death. Now, Degas considered himself a realist more than an impressionist. He was friends with venue and theater owners and therefore had access to rehearsals to draw and paint. He depicted some of the behind-the-scenes nuances of the theater. If you see the men sitting to the right of this painting, on the way over to the right, backstage at the ballet has a sordid history. It was known that men with promises of fame and success for the dancers would frequent the rehearsals to prey on the young women. This is potentially the fate of Marie after she was excused from the ballet. It was not uncommon for a young ballet dancer of the time, Marie, as were other dancers, to give sexual favors to male patrons. So hers is not a glowing of story and why it's in the complicated category, but she is featured in many of the drawings and paintings that Degas did of the ballet sequences. Now, all roads lead to Dali here at the Dali Museum. So our next and last complicated relationship belongs to Salvador Dali and his sister, Ana Maria. Ana Maria was born in 1908, just under 4 years after Dali. She was the only girl, as she and Dali had a brother by the same name who had died before he was born. Dali had a particularly close relationship to his mother, Felipa, an artist who crafted wax figurines out of colored candles. And after her death in 1921, when Dali was just 16, his father married his aunt, his mother's sister. There are only 2 known portraits of Dali's mother that he did, and only 1 known of his aunt, but there are several depicting Ana Maria, showing their close bond throughout their childhood when Dali was painting in an impressionistic style. Caraquez, painted by Salvador Dali in 1923. This painting is part of our permanent collection here at the Dali Museum and featured in our Impressionism special exhibition, and it features many figures of Ana Maria. All of the figures you see in the foreground and the bottom are her in different poses. Now, Portrait of My Sister, painted by Dali in 1923. This painting, painted in the same year as Caraquez, shows a stark difference in the reverence of the subject. Dali completed the first version of Portrait of My Sister in 1923 and originally represented his sister Ana Maria seated in an armchair with her hands crossed in her lap, very demure, with a small table with books on top, and it occupied the lower right-hand corner. Approximately 3 to 4 years later, Dali returned to this celebrated canvas that was well received and transformed it by adding the second upside-down figure, which radically contrasts with the first and makes the finished painting a double portrait. This is seen by many as an example of the growing tension between the two. Subsequent paintings of Ana Maria show her forlorn or looking away from the artist and eventually become even more grotesque as time progresses. Ana Maria was Dali's main model until Gala arrived on the scene. Building familial tensions due to the opposition of Gala, the abandonment during the Spanish Civil War of Dali to his family, and a few tell-all books, and Dali and Ana Maria's relationship comes to an end. She dies just a few months after Dali in 1989. Now for the lasting effect. Impressionism, the women who inspired the Impressionists, still leaves a lasting effect to this day. The Picnic by photographer Lee Miller in 1937 is reminiscent of the luncheon that we viewed earlier with Manet and with Monet. As you can see, this surrealist recreation of such, featuring such artists as Man Ray and Paul Eluard, and their muses at the time, Addie Finn and Noosh. And of course, Lee Miller herself was a former muse of Man Ray, who of course now is taking the photograph. But that is very reminiscent of those two portraits in a surrealist form. The Downgrading of Olympia by Danielle Ergo in 2014. I have to laugh at this. Today, there are artworks that challenge famous Impressionist works and their previous ideals, such as this one with the role reversal of the female subjects. So now Victorine Morant is the servant, and Laure is now the celebrated prostitute, laying across, smoking what can only be perceived as a cigarette, and demanding servitude. So this is by Danielle Ergo in 2014. And then Orther Curatorial, and how Impressionism pieces could be displayed. Claude Monet's rounded flower bed, displayed at the Detroit Institute of Arts, shows that you can even display Impressionism artwork in different methods and different modes to have a better understanding of the environment that you are in. Now, if this tickled your fancy, as Beth stated earlier, we do still have our current special exhibition, Dali and the Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, Degas, and more, which will be on view through April the 28th of 2024. So you still have a little bit of time to go and see a lot of these celebrated artworks upstairs. And I just wanted to thank everybody so much for being here today, for trudging it through Firestone Grand Prix to be here in person, and for all of you watching at home, thank you so much, and I appreciate you greatly. And if anybody would like to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, I hope everybody continues to enjoy your